The latest in tariffs is David Hebert, Senior Research Fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. Good to have you with us. Trump's sweeping 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imported into the U.S. has been called a risky bet. There's no discernible impact on price data as of yet, but the effect could be delayed. How do you see the future impact of all of the recent tariffs on American consumers?
Well, thanks so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So I'm coming to you from the great state of Michigan, which relies very heavily on imported steel and aluminum for our manufacturing base in the automotive sector. And so if I were to say that the Michigan people are terrified of these tariffs, that would be correct. So what tariffs ultimately do is they cause the price of goods and services in the United States to rise. It's important to recall that a tariff is a tax on imports. Other countries like Canada, Mexico, the UK, China, they're not importing goods into the US, they're exporting goods. And so because it's a tax on imports, it's ultimately a tax on the American people. We've seen this time and again from President Trump's taxes on imported steel and aluminum in 2017, President Obama's tariffs on Chinese tires in 2009, President Bush's tariffs on Chinese steel in 2002. Every single instance has been met with a rise in price. Now, this does boost domestic manufacturing of those particular items. We did see about 1,000 jobs created or saved because of President Trump's tariffs on steel. And this was especially true in the steel and aluminum producing sectors. But in sectors of manufacturing that use steel and aluminum, what we saw was a net loss of 75,000 jobs. And so what happens as a result of tariffs is not an increase for the American people. It's actually a net loss. And I can tell you, coming from the great state of Michigan, we are absolutely terrified of these tariffs on steel and aluminum and the effect that it will have on our automotive and brewing industries.
And how long do you anticipate these effects to last? Because Trump himself has said that they would work out in the long term. So I'm just wondering if you have a sense of the difference and when that might turn around.
Yeah, there are a lot of fantastic claims advanced about what will happen in the long term. And the unfortunate thing is we never really quite get to the long term. The effect of this is going to be higher prices for steel and aluminum. And what will end up happening are countries and companies that use these products finding substitute goods and getting away from the more expensive goods. So I don't see the price of these things coming down anytime soon unless we get rid of the tariffs. But even then, the damage to the economic friendship that we have with Canada, Mexico, the EU, etc., is already going to be done. And they're going to be looking for new trade partners that are not the United States.
The tariffs could also so some people say that tariffs could boost the American metal industry. You've also pointed to that. But one U.S. aluminum executive, William Uplinger, actually warned that the tariffs could cost American jobs, even in that industry, in the metals industry. What do you anticipate the impact on jobs to be?
So within the industry, I would expect that there will be perhaps some increase in jobs, at least initially. But I think he's exactly right that as American producers move away from using aluminum because, again, of its higher price, they're going to see a net loss. This is exactly what we're seeing in the steel industry right now. Recall that we had protection policies put in place in 2017, and yet U.S. Steel remains on the verge of bankruptcy. And so it's a really difficult position to say that we're going to pick a winner in these industries and see that winner happen in the long run. What ends up happening is usually a bunch of people lose economic opportunity.
And you've mentioned already some of the tension in terms of the relationships between these other countries because of the tariffs. But if we just look specifically at Canada and their retaliatory measures now, they've shot back very much at any instance of tariffs recently. And Canada's finance minister says they could retaliate again if the Trump administration imposes more tariffs. So where do you see this going if it continues? Do you think the tariffs will just cancel each other out? And also in terms of the relationship?
So I don't see them canceling each other out. I see them adding one on top of another. The reality is that when there's a trade war, there are never any winners. There's just one country that at some point says that enough is enough and they've experienced enough hardship that they're going to stop. But the damage will be done. And this is an additive thing. And not only is it additive in the short run, it's going to compound in the long run. Canada's trade minister is already flying around the world securing more free trade deals with other countries, attempting to supplant US trade with the trade of other countries. She's even telling her companies that they need to find alternative sources of parts and manufactured goods other than the United States. So even if we were to flip the switch and rescind all of these tariffs, the damage to the friendship that Canada and the US have enjoyed for over 100 years at this point has already been done, and it won't be brought back with the first olive branch extended.
It appears that Trump is trying to go back to the early days of the American economy, which was very heavy on tariffs and self-reliant in that way. How would you advise to move forward, if not relying on tariffs, to shore up American industry?
Right. So it's important to note that the U.S. did rely very heavily on tariff revenue until about 1913. It's also important to note that up until about 1940, the U.S. government did remarkably few things. Social Security wasn't around. The Department of Education wasn't around. There was no net interest on national debt because there was no national debt. Medicare and Medicaid didn't exist until the 1960s. And so all these things are the top 5 items that Congress spends money on every single year. You can run a government on tariff revenue when that government does remarkably few things. The CBO projects that the revenue from these tariffs will be about $270 billion per year, and that's under the most audacious claims that Trump has made about tariffing 10% for the entire world and 60% for China. $270 billion is a lot of money for you and I, but against a federal budget of $7 trillion, this amounts to about a 2.7% increase in their revenues. Now, that's not nothing, but it's also not going to move the needle on the fiscal health of this country. So I don't see tariffs as a pathway toward reducing the national debt. I certainly don't see it as a pathway toward lowering income taxes. I certainly don't see it even paying down the current $1.9 trillion deficit that the U.S. Congress is passing for this fiscal year. So it's hard for me to imagine the upsides of tariffs. It's very easy to imagine the downsides.
All right. With that, thank you so much for your time today, David Hebert, Senior Research Fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.